How you doing, YouTube? Eddie Berrios. I'm bringing to your attention today a black performer who I believe that a lot of black women don't know about, especially the young black women. And after I make this videos, I'd love to hear Rashida's thoughts on Miss Josephine Baker. She'd probably tear her down too. Miss Josephine Baker was a dancer, a singer, and an actor. She was born in 1906 in St. Louis, Missouri. She died April 12 in 1975 in Paris, France. She also went by the names Black Pearl, the Jazz Cleopatra, and the Bronze Venus. She was a brown-skinned woman. She wasn't light-skinned or dark-skinned. She was in the middle. To dark black people, they would probably refer to her as a light-skinned woman. She's best known for being a famous performer in Paris, a World War II spy, and a civil rights and colorism activist. Josephine Baker was born Frida Josephine McDonald on June 3rd in 1906 in St. Louis, Missouri. Her father was a drummer named Eddie Carson, who abandoned Josephine Baker and her mother, Carrie McDonald, at an early age. With her father gone, Josephine Baker had a difficult childhood. Her mother worked hard as a washerwoman, but the family often went hungry. When Josephine was 8 years old, she had to go work to get food. She worked as a servant girl in the homes of wealthy white people and as a waitress. Josephine Baker loved to dance and would sometimes dance on the street corners of the city for money. She soon got a job dancing for local vaudeville shows. She was a talented dancer, actress, and singer. She started getting more important roles. In 1923, she earned a spot on the Broadway musical Shuffle Along. In 1925, she moved to France, decided to take on a new adventure. She moved to Paris, France to star in a show called La Revue Negra, the Black Review. The show was a hit, and Josephine decided to make Paris her new home. Her most famous act was a dance that took place during the show called La Folie du Jour. During the dance, she wore nothing but a skirt made of bananas. Famous banana dance. Over the next 10 years, Josephine Baker became one of the biggest stars in Europe. She sung on popular records, danced in shows, and starred in movies. Josephine also became rich. She bought a large home in southern France called the Chateau de Milandes. Later, she would adopt 12 children from a variety of countries that she called her rainbow tribe. White kids, Spanish kids, black kids, French kids. She adopted like a kid from each part of the country, in the continent, in the world. They were called the Rainbow Tribe. During World War II, Josephine was recruited to spy for the French resistance. Because she was famous, she was invited to important parties and allowed to travel around Europe freely without being suspected. So this worked out for her working for the French resistance. Josephine Baker tried to return to the United States in 1936 to star in the Ziegfeld Follies. Unfortunately, she received poor reviews and was mistreated in the United States because she was a black woman. She was rejected by blacks as well as whites in most cases. So what they did was, back then the audience was segregated, where only whites can see her at one time or blacks can see her at one time. Josephine strongly disagreed, and she refused to perform for segregated audiences. She also spoke out against clubs and hotels that refused black people service. In 1963, Josephine participated in the March on Washington with Martin Luther King. She spoke before 250,000 people wearing her uniform of the French resistance. In her speech, she talked about the freedoms that she had in France. She talked about there was no colorism going on in France. Black, dark people, light black people were not being ostracized in France. And this is one of the main reasons why she decided to make her stay and live in France and buy a home in France. Because she was accepted good there, but in this country she wasn't, even by her own people. So, in her speech, she talked about the freedom she had in France and how she hoped that someday the same freedoms would soon come to the United States. 1975, Josephine starred in a show that reviewed her 50 years as a performer in Paris. The show sold out, and huge stars, including Mick Jagger, Diana Ross, Sophia Loren. A few days after the show opened on April 12, 1975, Miss Josephine Baker died of a brain hemorrhage. She had a variety of exotic pets, including a leopard named Chiquita and a chimpanzee named Ethel. Josephine's adopted children would entertain and sing songs for paying visitors to her house. Her house became sort of a museum of sorts. The NAACP named May 20th as Josephine Baker Day. She was asked by Coretta Scott King to become the new leader of the civil rights movement and the colorism movement in the United States after Martin Luther King Jr. died. Baker refused because she didn't want to leave her children. She was close friends with the famous actress Grace Kelly. So there's that history about Miss Josephine Baker. And let me show you a little picture of Miss Josephine Baker. That is Miss Josephine Baker. As a kid, I would watch her performances online, and sometimes I'd catch some of her performances on tribute shows, because back in the 70s, in the late 70s, they used to show, all the old stuff, and that's the first time I learned about her, was probably when I was about 12 or 13 years old. And I mostly know her because of the famous Banana Dance. She was a pretty woman. She was a brown-skinned woman. Also went through colorism and racism in this country. She got it both because she was in the middle. She wasn't dark and she wasn't light. She got it from both sides. She got it from her people. She got it from the white people. And this woman just said, you know what? Fuck this. She packed it up and moved to France, where they accepted her. And there's a story here, wait a minute, where she specifically talks about how dark-skinned blacks were received in France as well. She thought that because she was light-skinned, this is the only reason why she was being received in Europe at that time. But she didn't see any difference from the dark-skinned performers in France or the light-skinned black performers in France. They were treated the same. So she made France her home. She felt home, and I don't blame her. At that time, it was pretty tough over here for black people, dark-skinned and light-skinned black people. So that's my little lesson on Josephine Baker. And Rashida, if you make a video about this, I want to see what you find and dog this woman out too. Maybe you'll call her a sellout. Or you'll say you're the first one to talk about her like you do with every single thing. Peace out, Eddie Berrios.